Welcome to episode, I believe it's 13.
13. I'm
of,
on unlucky 13.
Oh, yeah. Of Dwelling Disasters. And I realized I've done 2 episodes now and haven't really talked about this. The team made a move to a new company. So we haven't really talked about this, but we moved from our former company. I'll just call it no names is one of the rules here. From the former company to the new company, we are now with the ever-growing, very sexy agency, the real estate agency called The Agency.
The Agency.
And it is most well known for the owner, Mauricio, and he was formerly one of the husbands of one of the Real Housewives. I actually don't remember her name.
I don't either. I didn't know about any of that until after we'd actually joined the agency.
But she is a Hilton, and he
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, she's a Hilton.
Really?
And he was like the top agent at the Hilton's real estate agency, which is Hilton and Highland.
I didn't
and
know
so
that. Okay.
He wanted to start his own. He wanted to become a partner actually at the company, and they said no. And so he left. And so he left her family's company. So like that was good drama for Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Absolutely.
He had his own reality show called Buying Beverly Hills. Mauricio Romanowski. His own it's called Buying Beverly Hills, which is really good. There was on 2 Netflix, seasons of it. I don't like reality TV, and I enjoyed it. So
it's on the same way. I haven't watched reality TV in many years, but I did watch that. And it was good.
We have a lot of new programs, services, et cetera, reach, marketing opportunities that we'll talk about more and more as we have some of those people on, but wanted to kind of recap that a little bit. Right now, what I want to do is I want to introduce one of the agents on the team that came with us, Michael Gordon, a.k.a. Coach Gordo.
Coach Gordo, that's me.
Okay,
yes,
so Michael, kind of give us just a little intro into yourself, your background, et cetera.
Just a little intro into my background. It's been kind of a twisty turny road for me, I guess. Long ago, feels like several lifetimes ago. I worked for my family in a family business. We owned a portable toilet business, believe it or not. So that was kind of my first career. We sold that. I then went back to college, got a degree and a teaching license. I was a high school teacher for 10 years. During both of those things, I was a high school football coach, so I did that for 20 years.
Is that the real reason why you became a teacher, was to coach?
I mean, kind of. So when I was working in the portable toilet industry, running my family company, that's when I started coaching. My head coach, a gentleman named Don McGatlin, came to me, and he paid me a compliment right after a bit of an insult. And we were sitting around a campfire together, actually, and he goes, Gordo, he says, you're not the best football player I ever coached. I was like, thanks, Coach. That's great. I really appreciate that. And he says, but he said, you're one of the best people I ever coached. And he said, and that's what I need right now. He said, I need someone to come work with my freshman offensive linemen. So that's what started me in coaching. I had no intention of ever becoming a coach. That wasn't my plan. I was still.
And your tackle size, you're a left tackle, right?
Yeah, I played left tackle. Yeah. In high school, I played left tackle. So that's all I knew was offensive line work. So I went, and that's how I started. And then when we sold the family business, I was kind of floundering a little bit, trying to decide what to do with my life. And I just decided I really, really enjoyed working with those kids. I thought that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed my time on the field with them. So that motivated me to go back to school to get my history degree and my teaching license, and then that's what led me to become a teacher.
And I know that connection with the students is real because, I don't know, half your clients, half your real estate clients now are
probably close to 80%. Are either my former players and students, or they're their families. They're related to them somehow. That's where a huge portion of my business comes from, which has been great. These are people that I genuinely love and care about and want to take care of.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, there's probably the majority of teachers that the students are plotting their demise, not planning their
few of them.
Future purchases with, right?
Some of them, yeah. I was lucky, though. I worked with a lot of really great teachers, too. When I was a teacher at Chatfield Senior High, and at Chatfield, I felt like the majority of the teachers there were really good, really cared about their kids, and had a group of kids around them that they treated kind of like their own.
Yeah. So you have been with our team now for right about 2 years. Is that right?
I think it's a little over 2 years. We got 2.5, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was right before. It was right before Santa Claus. So
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, it is right past 2 years here.
So I was with you guys at the old brokerage for about 2 years.
You were at Keller Williams for about 2 years before that.
So I started my career at Keller. I was there for a couple years, maybe like a year and a half or so, and then I went to a small kind of boutique brokerage that mostly deals with property management. It was called Invested Realty Group. That was a sister company of Invested Property Management. And then after a couple of years there, they decided they didn't really want in-house agents anymore. They didn't have in-house agents before. They brought me and another guy in, and then they decided they didn't really want them in-house anymore. So we just worked out a referral deal. So I actually had lunch with the owner literally yesterday, and so they still refer me out their investors and stuff.
Nice.
And then once they decided that, then that's when I came over to our previous brokerage.
So our rule here is that the first time on, at least, and probably more than after, you have to tell one horror story, a real horror story, no names, but it has to be a real horror story of a transaction. Give us the details, Michael.
Well, first, I'd like to say I've been very fortunate, right? I've had very, very few negative experiences in this business so far.
That's great.
Yeah. I'm knock on wood, all that fun stuff. But I did. I was still fairly new. I was a year, maybe 2 years in, and I'm at the closing table with some buyers. I'm the buyer's rep on this one. We're signing all the docs. Everything is good. Everything seems to be going along smoothly. And the listing agent calls me. And I tell this story at almost every closing now because it's funny. I tell my clients I don't have to be at closing.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's very little for me to do. I sign one piece of paper that I can sign digitally.
Right. They can say, or literally anyone else at the company can sign.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't have to be there. But I insist on being there, which was in my first brokerage, the big one. Their advice was that someday I should be so busy that I can't go to closings anymore. And so I tell this story as part of the reason I explain to people why I will always go to closings. So there we are. We're sitting at closing. I've already signed my one piece of paper. And listing agent calls me. And she says, "Hey, Mike, the lender didn't send the money." I said, "What do you mean the lender didn't send the money?" That's his whole job. That's why he exists, is to send the money, right? And this was a lender that I had not... This was not one of my referred lenders, right?
Yeah.
This is someone that was a friend of a friend or whatever of my clients, and which is fine. And so immediately, and this is what I tell my clients now, is the reason I go to closings is the 1% of the time something goes left at closing, right? I can be there to help run down the problem. So anyway, so I go, I tell my clients, I'll be right back. Step out of the closing room, get on the phone immediately, and I'm calling this lender, and he's just not answering. And then finally, when I get this dude to answer the phone, he explains to me how this is not his problem. This is not his problem. I was like, again, you exist for literally one reason.
Right.
To send the damn money. That's all you have to do. Send the money.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't see how this is my issue. What do you mean that I don't understand how you don't understand how this is your issue? Like, this is your whole role in our transactions to send the money.
Yeah.
This is all on a Friday afternoon. My clients already have everything set up to move on Saturday. They've got the truck set up. They've got everything set up. And it's now 3:30. Right? Federal wire deadline has now passed.
Yeah.
And this lender is giving us a hard time about sending the money. Like, he's off doing something else, and he's just too busy to get to make a phone call or whatever he has to do to send the money.
Like upending 2 to 5, 6 people's lives.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got my people can't move in. The other people are going to be waiting for their money on the other side. I mean, it's a disaster. So I had to, write up a whole, amendment to the contract, giving my people possession early without the funding. And, like I said, they had appliances being delivered on Saturday. They had all this stuff happen on Saturday. I mean, what a disaster. The guy did finally send the money on Friday afternoon. It was 4:30 or whatever it was when he was finally done, I don't know, getting his haircut or whatever it is he was doing that was more important than sending this money. So we were able to the wire doesn't send on Friday afternoon, but the bank can confirm that it has been sent.
Yeah.
Thankfully. So that was, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, my nightmare transaction, was not that bad. But for a few minutes there, I was.
It was the world. For
yeah, I was worried. And my poor clients, right there, this was their first, their first big home purchase, and I mean, it was not, it wasn't pleasant for them. So I tell it at almost every closing to explain to people, like, this is why I come to closing.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are I don't need to be here.
Yeah.
Right. Also, I mean, I like to be there. It's an emotional thing. Like, I mean, you've done a ton of these. A real estate transaction is a very emotional thing.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some closure that happens at that closing table. Not only the closing of the deal, but right, some closure between you and your clients. I always tell my buyer clients, like, I see you a lot for whatever it is, a month or 2 months or whatever it is when we're in our search. And then when you close on it, like, I miss you, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's weird. I don't see you as often.
Yeah.
So being at the closing table gives some sort of closure to that.
Totally. And I think I just covered a closing for Amy, our team lead, a few weeks ago, and the seller was very, like, super disappointed. They're like, oh, I really want, like, what do you mean the buyer's not going to be here? I'm like,
right.
We just don't do that. I don't know. And she's like, well, I want to tell her all these stories. And I'm like, I hear you. But yeah, my pre-COVID, since COVID, we basically don't get together anymore.
No, it's very rare. I've done it a handful of times.
Pre-COVID, it was almost always a joint closing, and usually in testy deals, agents wanted to cut that up. They're like, hey, let's keep the buyer and seller separate. I actually felt the opposite, for exactly what you said. I want to get them together because when words aren't on the computer screen, when numbers aren't on contracts, when people can see that they're people,
right,
they're usually able to put all that aside and feel better about the transaction and be like, oh, this wasn't somebody trying to rip me off. This was somebody that with a family that was trying to take care of business for their family, and they
it's
realize,
just another person,
right? They're people with stuff. So I liked it together, but we really haven't obviously done that.
No, I said I've only done a handful of those. One of them was pretty contentious through the deal, and and we did all sit down together, which was unusual. And it started out a little bit chippy and contentious. Some not awesome things were said. Mostly, kind of backhanded, nothing real overt. But by the end of it, everybody was kind of laughing and telling stories, and it was a really positive experience.
The one that I will never do, though, I will always keep these separate, and I'll keep the same party separate, is divorce closings.
Oh, I haven't done one of those yet.
Oh yeah, I've done about 5 or 6 or something like that, and I've actually added some marketing stuff just to try to increase that.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, absolutely. That's good business. Yeah.
But almost always the house got to get sold. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, almost always has to get sold, and I don't. You don't want those people in a room together.
It would, man.
Nothing good is going to come from that.
I learned my lesson the very first time when literally the parents of the divorcees had to sit in the middle. It wasn't between them and the buyer. The buyer was actually fine.
Sure, yeah.
He was just concerned because they were neglecting the house, but he was fine. But the sellers hated each other so much,
right,
and they were positive they were trying to steal from the other person. That every single document, we had attorneys there, we had parents there, we had everybody reviewing everything because they were so mad at each other.
So you earn your money on that one, huh?
Yeah. No joke. I was mowing lawns. I was doing all kinds of stuff.
Oh man,
I was doing everything.
They don't tell you that in real estate school. They end up mowing lawns and shoveling sidewalks and driveways and stuff. They don't tell you about that part.
Whenever something happened, I had to call 6 people. I had to call each spouse. I had to call each spouse's parents and each spouse's attorney.
Oh my goodness!
In each one of these it was like, hey, closing's at 2. That took an hour and a half to communicate because I couldn't just send one email. Like it had to be separate for. Anyway.
I am sure there's no group text there.
Nope.
There's none of that.
Nope.
Oh,
no.
man.
That was way before
okay.
all that stuff. Like text was. Yeah, that was. I'm an old man, Michael.
Oh, stop! You're younger than I am. So
old.
You're older. You're older in this business than I am. Yeah.
That was when I first started. There were still the MLS books.
Oh my goodness, really?
I didn't use it, but they still existed, and there were some of the agents that were still using the MLS books when I first started. That was, they were like waiting, like Monday morning.
Yeah, I'd say they came out on Monday morning, right? I remember. I'm lucky. I didn't have to use the MLS books. I've never had to chase down a wet signature, right? Like that has been, that would be my nightmare, chasing, my clients all over town to get a contract signed on the back of my car hood or whatever.
We did, yeah. I did have my first maybe 3 or 4 years. I did have a lot of fax contracts.
Yeah.
That was still very, very common. I wouldn't say it was a majority, but I would say I had to have a fax number. I remember I had to have a fax number. It was digital, so it came to my email.
Okay,
but I had to have a fax number, and I would say a good 3 to 4 deals a year. We did fully through fax at that point in time, and it didn't feel like it was a hassle. It just kind of seemed like normal operation. Okay. It didn't seem super strange.
Yeah, I mean, faxes were semi-convenient.
It was because it was there were a lot of brokerages that were still requiring wet signatures on everything, and they weren't allowing digital stuff, or they still accepted it. So it was just a lot easier than scanning in 50 pages and emailing it, and then yada yada.
That makes sense.
Well, the main thrust of the chat today is there is a podcast called Freakonomics. And if you don't know it, it's a economics podcast by a man named Stephen Dubner. He wrote a book about economic theory with another economist named Steve Levitt.
2 books.
2 books, thank you. What was the other? It was Freakonomics and like more freaky economics or something.
Super Freakonomics.
Super Freakonomics,
yeah. Yeah, I read them both back, and I taught economics briefly, and I assigned those as reading, and yeah.
So one of the research papers that they wrote for the first book was about real estate agents, and the main premise was that, typically speaking, real estate agents sold their houses for more money, and the houses stayed on the market longer, and that the economic incentives of commission structure was not enough to incentivize real estate agents to sell their clients' homes for maximum dollar.
Right. The argument was that as an agent, the agents left their own homes on the market longer and sold them for more money than their clients' homes.
Right.
Their clients' home.
Yep.
The argument was essentially that they're just looking to get the clients' homes closed.
Right. Yeah. And that the argument was, well, they're making commission on the sale price.
Right.
Therefore, more sale price, more commission. However, the commission amount is so small that it doesn't actually incentive. It's to sell an extra $10,000, the agent makes an extra $100. So it's not incentivizing enough for them to wait an extra month to sell their house
for an extra $10,000.
Right. So update to that research paper with the National Association of. I was told stop using abbreviations. So because we're too inside pool.
No more NAR, huh?
No. So I will say NAR from now, but
out of force of habit.
If you don't know, NAR stands for the National Association of Realtors.
It's the largest trade group in America.
Largest trade group in America. We in Colorado have a local organization called CAR, Colorado Association of Realtors, which is like a segment. If you're part of CAR, you're part of NAR.
Right.
And there was a lawsuit filed against not just NAR, but almost every single large brokerage, nationwide brokerage.
Yeah, all the big brokerages were wrapped up in that.
Keller, Remax.
Yep.
Caldwell? I don't remember.
I don't remember exactly. There were a couple that were left out, but most of the giant brokerages,
most of the big
were
big
wrapped
ones.
up into the settlement or into the lawsuit.
And they, for the most part, all but a couple of them are still working through it, but I think almost all the parties settled.
Yes.
And the National Association of Realtors settled for approximately $400 or $450 million, spread out over 3 years.
Yeah, so it was between $450 and $500 million, if I remember right. Yeah.
And then there was, and in addition to the financial payout, there was also about a dozen practice changes that they agreed to abide by. And the biggest one that affects, I think, buyers and sellers is that no longer is the buyer's side agent's commission implied. Now the buyer side commission has to be negotiated inside of the contracts and cannot be advertised in the multiple listing service, the MLS.
Correct.
So what used to happen is when we pulled up a house, it would have a bunch of info that you saw on the public side, and then there was a bunch of private information, and one of those pieces of private information was how much the seller was willing to pay in a co-op to the buyer's agent.
Right. It was their offer of compensation to the buyer's agent.
And the reason why I wanted to talk about this podcast with somebody is not that I agree with everything. In fact, I want to talk about all the things that I disagree with them.
Right.
But what I do think is that it is a very accurate depiction of what the public probably thinks about the real estate market and what the public probably perceives from the NAR settlement. So the big piece that I think is that came out of it was they think that paying 2.5% to 3% per side in a house sale is too much compared to other industrialized nations in terms of how much they pay.
Right.
And here's the thing that I don't disagree with them. When you look at paying 5 to 6% towards commissions, or they called it something, we call it something else. We don't call it commissions. We call it compensation. We call it compensation, not commission. That I don't disagree with them that as like it's in restaurants, we pay 20% towards waiters,
right.
And now when a really nice dinner was $20 to $30 a person, that seemed fair in comparison to how much the kitchen staff was making.
Sure.
But now when you go to a really nice restaurant and you're spending $150 to $200 per person or more, and so the wait staff is making $100 per table, and the kitchen staff is making $12, $13, $14 an hour,
right.
That is unfair. And so now a lot of restaurants have taken a lot of that tip compensation and split that with the kitchen staff.
I've known that's been going on for a while, that a lot of really nice restaurants have always their servers have tipped out the kitchen staff, and I think that's appropriate. I have issues with tipping culture in general. We're like the only industrialized nation on earth that still tips people, or one of very few anyway.
Yep.
I don't understand.
And that's my point. That's my point. I think that is missing from the argument that other countries pay 1% to 2% per side.
Right.
Is what they aren't understanding is what else is happening behind the scenes.
Right.
Which is that exactly that tip culture that you're talking about that isn't apparent. I guarantee you, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but what people don't understand is that when they are paying 3% per side, when I'm getting paid 2.5% to 3% per side,
right,
what I'm paying is probably about 0.5% to 1% of that is what I pay to get that client is marketing costs to procure the client. Probably 0.5% is being paid to my brokerage.
To your brokerage,
Maybe another 0.5% is being paid in taxes.
Right.
Maybe another 0.5% is being paid in fees to companies like Zillow or Realtor.com or Homes.com in a split for a referral. And so what the actual agent is getting paid is like 0.5% to 1%. So we are still, like, after you take all that stuff out of it, we are still getting paid what they're talking about.
Right.
About
we're still
1%.
Getting that 1%. Or
right.
Whatever. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
But it's that there's all this other stuff that's happening on the background. And so their argument is, well, now that the settlement has happened, we'll just pay that agent 1%. Well, all that's going to happen is that agents are just all going to, if that is the case, if the market does flip that way, there's going to have to be a drastic readjustment of the way that the industry works, because just no one will do that. Because
it would have to be a total restructure.
Right. Because those other expenses aren't going away.
Right.
Like my marketing charge, I'm not going to have to spend less. Events don't cost less money just because you paid me less.
Your mailers don't cost less, your whatever. And that's like you said, people don't. I don't like making the argument necessarily that you should pay me X because it costs me Y
Right.
to do the job. But I mean, it's true, right? Like if I have a listing, and I'm going to get my 2.5% or 3% or whatever it is on that listing, I spend $500 or $600 on photos. I spend, depending on the size of your house, I spend between $1,000 and $4,000 on staging. Hundreds of dollars on mailers, and and that's after I have the client, right?
Right.
That's not including everything I did before that to get the client. I mean, there's a lot of money in real estate. I mean, there's no way around it.
Yep.
I mean, just
And that was
because
their point.
the numbers are so big.
Yep.
There is a lot of money in it, but it's also a relatively expensive business to be in. Or let me rephrase that. It can be a relatively expensive business to be in. If you're good at this job, I think it's pretty expensive.
We met with an agent from Palm Beach who runs the Palm Beach agency, and he had a really interesting point. He's like, people look at my sales and they were $5 million and that looks really good. He's like, what you don't know is that 30% of those listings that are $2 to plus $1 million don't sell.
Nope.
And it cost me $30,000 to $50,000 in marketing
and staging
to do that. He's like, yeah, when I sell one, it's huge and I make hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's like, but when I don't sell one, it cost me $50,000.
Right.
He's like, so if I don't sell 2 or 3 a year, that's $150,000, $200,000 a year in just dead money of money I spent to try to sell that house and don't sell. So there's a flip side to that as well.
To me, it's always been funny that everybody always thinks that everybody else is overpaid.
Right.
Right? Like you're overpaid for your job. You're overpaid for this job, that job. You ask anybody out there, they'll tell you that lawyers are overpaid and whatever. These guys are. Shockingly, I used to have people tell me that when I was a teacher, I was overpaid. Everybody else is overpaid, but not you. You and your job, you work your butt off, and you're underpaid, and whatever. Nobody else. Nobody says that about themselves,
right?
But everybody looks at some other industry and thinks they're overpaid. Like I said, lawyers is a big one. Everybody thinks lawyers are overpaid, but I'll tell you right now, if I needed one,
worth every penny.
Worth every penny, right? Like every time I've ever needed a good lawyer in this real estate game, I don't really care how much it costs.
So
right?
the statistics they use in the episode are that there's approximately 3 million licensed agents in the United States.
Yep.
And that there's approximately 4 million transactions per year.
Yes.
So if you take that as a double-sided transaction, they all aren't double-sided, so that's not the case. But just for sake of argument, you have 8 transactions for every 3 real estate agents. You have 8 million transactions, 3 million real estate agents.
Right.
So if you take those 3 million agents, divide that by that, that's 2. I
was a history teacher.
2.66. I think it's 2.6 transactions per agent that happen.
Sure.
And I believe last year it was an ungodly number. It was something like 60 or 75% of agents did 0 transactions last year.
Yeah, I think it was either 1 or less.
Yeah,
it's something like that. Yeah.
And typically speaking, it's like 20 to 30% do 1 or less. Last year it was really high. It was like 60 or 70% did like 1 or less. But that means that the vast majority. So in my category, based on the statistic they were talking about, we would both be in the top 20% of agents.
Absolutely.
But what that means is that there are just a huge amount of agents that are doing nothing. Or almost nothing.
Yes.
So the numbers really get screwy because the median agent makes about $40K per year. I
think it was 45. I think. Yeah.
And that's earning 45, not taking home 45, because we mentioned,
taxes, costs of doing business, all that stuff.
So if I run that same, it's probably making something like $20K a year, take home.
I made more as a teacher.
Right. So it is low. Now, if you are a full-time doing full-time business, you should be making more than that.
One would hope.
But I think that is a pretty relevant, realistic number from the majority of agents I talk to, where they do their brother's house, their mom's house, and maybe 1 or 2 other people's house per year, and they're doing 3 or 4 a year. Probably doing like 40K in business.
Right. I think that's the thing is you have a ton of quote unquote real estate agents, right? a ton of them, apparently half of them or 60% or whatever, this isn't a full-time job for them, right?
Yep.
They do their friends and their family, and they do maybe 1 or 2 deals here and there. Maybe they have another job. It's a part-time gig for them. Maybe they're retired. I've seen a lot of retired people that do, a deal or 2 a year here and there to supplement their income, or maybe you're a stay-at-home mom that wants to supplement your income, and that's really, there's a huge number of real estate agents out there that fall into those categories.
Yeah.
And I think that one of my issues with the real estate industry as a whole has always been just that the barrier to entry is really low.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there are a lot of people, and another group of people that don't do a lot is a lot of young people that either didn't want to go to college or failed at college or can't find a job or don't know what they want to do or whatever. They're kind of floundering in life. They just, I'll just get a real estate license.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't ever do anything. And that's, I think, the big brokerages really feast on people like that, right? Because they charge their desk fees and their monthly dues and all this other stuff, and they don't care.
Yeah.
If you ever sell a single house,
Right. You sell one house, you sell 0. Like,
They don't care.
We'll make the $5,000 to $10,000 off you.
right? Every
regardless
year
what
off
you
of
do.
our fees and all that kind of stuff. So they don't care. The first big brokerage I worked at, in my office alone, there were 300 agents.
Yeah.
300 agents just at our office. And there was a handful of them that actually did any real business, probably less than 100, and the rest of them were just, those part-time agents. I don't know what it would look like to raise that barrier of entry, but I think that would be, I would be supportive of that.
And especially with that barrier of entry, knowing, because I came from one of those brokerages too, and their main message to every agent was stay out of the transaction, because not because that's better for the client, because they were terrified of getting sued.
Yes.
Because they had so low barrier of entry, they had basically no oversight,
Right.
and so they wanted to not get sued. And the way they did not get sued was to teach their agents, stay as far away of the transaction, have plausible deniability
For everything.
about everything. You want to be able to say, I didn't know. They told me, don't let the inspector send you the inspection.
Yes. I heard the same thing.
Yeah, they're like, don't let the inspector send the inspection, because anything that's in the inspection, then you can be liable for.
Right.
And now I know, I'm like, if I don't get the inspection, how am I going to know what to ask for? How am I going to know what's wrong with the house?
How am I going to write the inspection objection?
How am I going to know any of those things?
How am I going to represent my people?
Right.
Right. How is that going to happen?
And I understand if that is your interaction with your agent, if your agent literally is opening doors and setting up appointments, paying that person is worthless.
It's very frustrating, I'm sure.
I would rather pay that person hourly.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
that person literally did nothing.
Yeah.
Or they didn't do anything that was helpful for me. I ran the whole transaction. They were just
Right.
an Uber driver for me.
Basically,
They drove the keys from house to house.
I say we don't even put people in our car usually anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not even an Uber
Yeah.
driver, right?
Right,
Like,
right. Yeah.
Just meet them places.
So I understand from the economist standpoint, if that is the vast majority of agents are
and that
those
probably is
types of agents.
the majority of agents.
Yeah.
Really, that's your 50, 60, 70% of agents that probably fall into a category similar to that.
And they talked about doing a different model, which I actually was interested in when they were talking about this, was that the majority of real estate agents are women.
Yes.
And
it's like 2/3.
2/3, yeah.
It's
The majority of agents
it's
are
a pretty
women.
big majority, yeah.
And it is the only professional industry that they could really think of at the scale that the employees do not get paid for their labor in a normal way.
Right.
So like we said, 25 this last year, 50 to 75% or something like that of people didn't sell anything. So that means that there was
They made $0.
1.5 to 2 million ish people that made $0, but were definitely working. And maybe,
Yeah.
but made $0
Right.
in that capacity.
Yes.
And like that would be insane in basically any other industry.
Oh my God, yeah.
So
I can't even imagine.
they said, well, why can't we just pay them hourly? And actually, I was thinking about, at first I was like, that's stupid. But I was thinking about that. I'm like, that actually, you couldn't do, the problem is you can't do that inside of the current model.
No.
Because
Everything
inside
would have to change.
Yeah, inside the current model, I pay my brokerage, I pay referral fees, blah, blah.
Right.
And so if I'm getting paid hourly on top of all that other stuff,
Right.
I can't make that work.
No,
but if we could come up with a way to remove all of those other things inside of it, and then you just want to pay your agent like your lawyer and pay them every
email,
6 minutes,
per phone call, or whatever. Yeah.
Every single time I do something, I start the clock, and every 6 minutes I add a billable 6 minutes to you, and I set my hourly rate and do that. Like, I think I'm fine with that. Actually, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
I wouldn't personally be opposed to it, other than that just sounds like a nightmare to keep track of all that, right?
Well, I mean,
there's ways
accountants
to do
it.
Accountants do it. Yeah, that's not a big deal.
I'm sure we could figure it out.
I think one of the biggest differences in our industry between a lawyer and an accountant, they do that as well, and a lot of other pay per hour industries, right? Is my job, and this is one of the reasons I like my job. It's one of the reasons I liked being a football coach. Is I either succeed or fail, right, every day, right?
Yep.
And I've either succeeded in getting my client under contract, or I've failed, and I need to work harder. And I like that. But we've all had clients where buyer clients where we looked at 50 houses or whatever, and they never bought anything, or sellers where we listed it and it didn't sell. And if I'm charging you by the hour, you still have to pay me now, right? So if I showed you 50 houses and you didn't like any of them, you're still getting a bill from me for $10,000 or whatever the billable hours is on that, right? And I don't know that one of the big cruxes of the Freakonomics thing is motivation for us, right?
Right.
What motivates us to be successful? Like, I don't know if that motivates me to be successful. You're paying me whether you get a new house or not.
Exactly. So that's the thing, is that when I say the economists in the episode talked about, they look at it. I really, really appreciate the podcast and listening to economists' perspectives, because they think about things in terms of incentives.
Yeah, absolutely. They think about it in a different way, and that's one of the reasons I've always loved Freakonomics.
Yeah, and I really, really like when they kind of break it down that way. But what I think that they're kind of losing in that scenario is they're misinterpreting the unintended consequences of doing that, which is exactly what you're saying, which is that then my incentives might not be perfect at this point in time. If you did it that way, my incentives would be like
worse.
In not my actual personal incentives, but my economic incentives, as they are talking about it, would be backwards. Right?
Absolutely, and I think that's part of the problem is in any industry, right? You've got good people and you've got bad people. I had a principal that used to tell us as teachers. He said, if you do this job right, it'll be the hardest job you ever have. However, it has the potential to be the easiest job you could ever have, right? If you don't really care and you don't do it right. And I think being a real estate agent is a lot like that.
Yeah.
If you're good at this job, it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
Right? You do a lot of work. You know, you put a lot in for your clients. You care about your clients and all that kind of stuff. If you don't really care about your clients, it could be a pretty easy gig, really.
Yeah.
And I think the good thing, or one of the pluses, the positive things about the way it's structured now, is if you're good at your job, it rewards you for that. Right? I only get paid if I successfully get you into a new home or sell your home. Right? Whereas the hourly rate, I get paid no matter what. Right? It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. So, my point of that is, going back to all of it, is if we wanted to rebuild the industry into something else, and the incentive and the pay model and something else, I think it's fine. Sure. But I actually don't have a problem with it. They were talking about it like it's like the mafia, and it's like a ton of tacit collusion and in the mafia, et cetera, et cetera. I could tell you, they were like, we don't have any evidence that I can tell you, at least from my experience, 12 years in residential and then like 5 or 6 before that in commercial. I have never had a conversation with anybody trying to fix or collude or about that with anything. It was more just like, this is kind of what they said secondly, which is like it's tacit collusion, which is that's just the way that it has been done, right? And so they just kept doing it, and that's definitely what happened. Was I started, and they're like, this is kind of what happens, and so like here's how it works, and it's cool. But like there was no smoke-filled rooms. There was no like, here's what we're gonna do to pull one over on the American people. It was just kind of like, I'm just one person. Like there is like, even though I was part of a company that was gigantic,
Right.
making billions
Yep.
and across all 50 states,
Mm-hmm.
I was just one person, and my business was just one person,
Right.
and nobody had a conversation with me saying, here's how it's going to work.
No, in fact, I remember pretty vividly when I first got in the business, and I went through real estate school, and at no point in real estate school do they tell you what the commission or the fee structure is, right? They tell you that you're going to get paid based on a success fee or whatever. And then I got to my first big brokerage, and it took me what felt like a really long time. I didn't know how much to charge.
Right. Yep.
I was like, how much do I don't understand. How much am I charging here? How does this work? And nobody would tell me.
Yeah.
I think it was because they're all terrified they don't want it to look like there's any kind of a collusion.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, this is ridiculous. Like, am I just supposed to make this up? Do I charge 25%? That
Right.
sounds great. What do I charge here?
And I can guarantee you. So now that I've been in the business a long time, like my commission, I've kind of like set my compensation, not commission, my compensation at like a set amount. But when I was young, kind of you're talking about when I was young in my career, 2.5% to 3% sounded like a dream. Like that, my first several listings, I didn't get anything close to that.
Really?
I think my first listing, I probably lost money selling that house from all of the extra expenses and stuff. But I was just like, I needed to get my first listing. I would like do like anything I could,
Right, yeah.
just to get that first listing.
Yeah.
Getting listings, especially on buy side, it's different. But on listings, it's tricky to kind of to get going.
It is. It's tough to get going.
Yeah.
I mean, almost every agent I've ever spoken to was super buyer heavy in the beginning of the career, myself included, right? And now I'm like 60-40 probably, sometimes 50-50, depends on the year. But I mean, as far as my compensation now, I'm pretty stubborn about it.
Yeah.
Like the whole National Association of Realtors settlement, you're not allowed to advertise the buyer's side commission, right? And I remember we had team meetings and you talk to people in the industry and they ask you like, well, how am I going to know how much am I getting paid? And that was a big deal in our industry. How am I going to know? And my answer to that has always been, I don't care how much you're offering. This is what I charge.
Yeah.
You want to offer me X? That sucks. I charge Y.
Yeah.
Right. This is what I charge.
And that's Lauren Gates in our company had a really good way of putting it. I had been talking about it kind of similarly, but she really kind of worded it in a really great way that made a lot more sense, which was essentially talking about it as a buyer closing fee instead. And so like here's how much you have to pay to buy this house. You have to pay this much in down payment, this much in closing costs, this much in buyer compensation.
Right.
My job is to try to get the seller to cover as much of those things as possible.
Absolutely.
And more than likely, I can get the seller to get a lot of this covered. But if not, this is how much that fee is. So the buyer understands that is one of their closing fees that we are going to try to get the seller to pay a percentage of.
That's good. I like that. I went to the Ninja Workshop with Larry Kendall last year, and Larry's a genius, and he approaches his clients and says, listen, there's 3 possible outcomes here. A, the seller, I'm able to negotiate for the seller to pay for my compensation, right? That's option number, or letter A. B, I am unable to get the seller to pay my entire compensation, in which case you and I, me and my client, will work something out where they pay me either the whole compensation or whatever portion the seller is not willing to pay, right? Or C, if you love this home and the seller is unwilling to pay my compensation and you are unwilling to pay my compensation, I will let you out of the contract and I'll let you pursue the home unrepresented by me, right? And I think that's just a very clear way to present it to a buyer, right? Is understand that, because I don't work for free. Like a ton of my clients are my former students, and I genuinely love these people, right? But I have kids, and I've got to support a family, and I don't work for free. But it's just a very clear way to present it to them, and I really like that. And most of the time, in fact, I've never had anything happen other than option A. Every single time I've been able to negotiate that the seller pays for my fee, my compensation.
And the I would say it is like a sticking point, which is that the majority of time compensation for buy side at least usually landed somewhere between 2 and 3%
Typically, yeah.
But whenever the market was not super balanced, whenever the market was not one offer in, accept the offer,
Right.
whenever it was that house sits for 1,000 days on market, or that house is going to sit for 1,000 minutes and then it's going to have 20 offers and go way over.
We've seen
Any
both
of those
things,
times, compensation went wildly over or under that sticking point.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so if it was super, super slow, you get builders, you get sellers offering much higher commission rates to just motivate buyers agents to bring people.
For sure. Builders are the biggest example of that, right? Like in slow times, they'll pay you 3%, 4%, 5%.
Yep.
In fast times, you're lucky if they'll pay you $1,000.
Right. I literally had that. And then the exact opposite in 2021. I don't think there was a single buy side transaction I had that year where I got a quote unquote like normal commission amount.
Yeah.
I had to do something to wiggle that around every single time. Either the buyer was paying for it, or I had to discount it wildly to get the deal under contract or something like that. But almost every single time I was getting paid either less or being paid directly by the buyer at that point in time also. So while during balanced markets, it usually does kind of come back and stick at that point in time.
Absolutely.
We were negotiating commissions at that before and after 2019 anyway.
Oh, of course.
Depending on the market, how the market was working.
Well, that's. I mean, the commission or the compensation has always been negotiable. When I very first, I went to my principal to tell him I was leaving teaching and I was going to get into real estate, and we talked about it. He was a great guy. I loved him to death. And one of the things he told me, he said, "I've never paid a full commission to a realtor ever in my life." And he's, and this is a long conversation we had or whatever. And he knew it was negotiable, and he negotiated with every agent he'd ever hired, going back, whatever that is, 15 or 20 years. And I mean, it's always been that way. But I think that the lawsuit specifically, I think they demonstrated, and they proved in a court of law that there was enough tacit collusion that that most people didn't know that, or even if they knew that, they didn't act on it.
Yeah, and I think that it was the buyer's side commission, I think, was hoisted onto sellers without much choice, at least in language.
Sure.
For the majority of the time, they just felt like if this is what I pay.
And in habit, right? It had just been done that way for so long. It was assumed, right? It was assumed that the seller was just going to pay for both agents, and even though it was always negotiable, it was never written down in law essentially that's how it happened. That's just how it had always been done. Yeah. Right. Which is not necessarily a good reason to do things. Yep. Right. One of my least favorite things is when people say, "Well, we do it that way just because that's how we've always done it." That's pretty terrible excuse.
And there were tons of companies that all went against that grain, right?
Yeah,
there was they all called themselves something different, but there was always discount brokerages that pushed that and tried to move that one way or another for whatever reasons, and they either succeeded or failed or found somewhere in the middle. I think Redfin is probably the most successful of those companies.
Probably.
That is, they mostly kind of stopped discounting on the buy side drastically, but they still do. I still see quite a few of them with discounts on it.
Well, I think that's one of the most interesting things that I've seen since I got into this industry and really started paying attention to it. is like we said earlier, there's so much money involved, right? What was it, 4 million transactions last year at an average somewhere around $500,000. I mean, that's just a lot of money.
Yep.
A lot of money. So that anytime there's that much money, there's people that are going to try to take their piece of that pie.
Yep.
And there has been. It's been Redfin and Open Door and Zillow and all of these big, well-funded companies have tried to come in and have tried really hard to take their piece of that pie, and to really, in a way, separate us as agents from our clients. That really is their end goal. A lot of these companies is to separate us from our clients. And I've always thought was interesting is that in almost every other industry, technology and that kind of funding has successfully changed it and made it to where you can order cars online and all that kind of stuff now, right? But in real estate, they have all failed to some degree.
Yeah.
Some have been semi-successful, right? But they've all failed to some degree. And I think and I don't have any research to back this up, my personal anecdotal reason for that is I think people still really, really want a relationship with the person that helps them through this giant purchase in their life.
Well, it's like two examples. I'll say the first example is it's like a lawsuit. You in every single 50 states, you can absolutely file a lawsuit, go to court,
Represent
do anything
yourself.
you want to by yourself.
Absolutely.
And hardly anybody does, or hardly anybody does successfully.
I certainly wouldn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't either, but you absolutely can. But it's kind of the same thing. You can, but almost nobody does.
Right.
And so why not? There's there's LegalZoom, there's all these like technology platforms you can do it, but most people don't.
Right.
And the other thing is, even in industries where it's fine, and I actually don't feel like there's a big issue with it, like travel agents and car salesmen and insurance salesmen and stuff like that. There is a movement, I feel like, in the last couple of years going back to travel agents, going back to car salesmen. Like there was a few years when I did everything online. I just showed up and I'm like, I want to drive that. Here's the car I want to drive. And then like I rarely talked to someone until I get to the finance department. Then it was a freaking nightmare.
That's the worst person to talk to.
But like the last car that I bought, like I had he called himself an advisor, and they don't call him sales anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, here's my list. Here's what I'm looking for. And then daily they would send me a list like, hey, here's some new things. And it went back to having an advisor, having a car salesman. With insurance. Like everyone is buying online for forever. I've gone back and I have an insurance broker. And I would never not have a broker anymore. I love John.
I agree.
I call him and I say, John, here's the problem. What can I do? I don't have to send a contact form online. Call John. John knows what to do. I prefer. I'm probably paying 10% more.
Right.
And I am fine doing that.
You've got someone you can call that'll solve problems and can troubleshoot things. And that in the Freakonomics episode, they talked about the travel agents, and it's I came of age in a time when we were just going away from travel agencies, right? And you could, get on whatever Travelocity or whatever the websites were at the time and book your own flights and do all that stuff. And so that's kind of how I've never used a travel agent in my life. Now that I'm older and I've got a family, I do all of the travel planning for my wife and my kids. I book flights and hotels, and I do all of it. I booked a trip to Disneyland in October for myself, my wife, my 2 kids, my sister, her husband, and my mother and father, so 8 of us. And let me tell you, I would have happily paid an extra 10% or whatever to a travel agent. Like I really, it was funny, before I listened to that episode, I've been thinking like, God, I wonder if I should try to find a decent travel agent. Because my family were trying to travel more often, and if I could just take that off my plate and just not mess with it, like would that, and it might, in the end, be cheaper, right? Maybe they can save me money here and there, whatever. I don't know, but I want an advisor, and I think that's an important thing. I think a car salesman calling themselves an advisor that's important to me. Just like I tell people all the time in real estate, I am not a salesperson. It is not my job to sell you a home. Right. My job is to advise you and to represent you. Right. Through this process. And I tell my clients, I don't care where you live. Right. Right. I'm not living there. Don't ask me if I like this house. Because that's not important. Right. My opinion on the value matters. My opinion on certain things matters. But it doesn't matter if I like this house. It's your house. Right. My job is to represent you and your best interests throughout this process. If I can get a car advisor that's not trying to sell me this thing or that thing, that's legitimately trying to get me into the car that will best serve my needs, sign me up. Yeah. 100%. We are about to get kicked out here. Oh my goodness! So, we've been having so much fun.
I know. It's,
oh my God!
It's 1:12, so I'm surprised they're not here now. But Michael Gordon, thank you so much. We'll have you on again.
Thank you, sir.
And Dwelling Disasters, the real drama of real estate. Thank you guys so much, and tune in again soon.
Thanks, guys.